Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. I'm Andia, a licensed addiction counselor, and along with my co-host, Laura Kissman, a quantum nutritionist, we will be inviting expert scientists, clinicians, survivors, and thrivers to distill their pearls of wisdom attained from applying quantum biology to their fields of research and everyday lives. Our goal is to bring you easy to understand principles and practices about the study of light, water, and magnetism so you can take your health into your own hands.
Welcome, everyone. Today we have a very special guest called R. Blank, who is the CEO of Shield Your Body, whose mission it is to make technology safer. With hundreds of thousands of customers in over 30 countries, and having been interviewed on platforms ranging from ABC television to ElectricSense, R is an internationally followed expert on issues of EMF, that's electromagnetic frequencies, health and safety. He was inspired to create Shield Your Body when he co-authored the best-selling book, Overpowered, with his father, Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists. He has degrees from Columbia University and UCLA. So in our mind, he is many things. He's a wonderful son, of course, to co-write that book with his dad, but he's a technologist, my understanding, a software engineer by background.
Former, reformed.
Reformed.
Yeah.
I understand that. I understand. I'm a reformed holistic nutritionist myself. So trying to get off the whole food piece and think about other things like non-native electromagnetic frequencies and how they, interfere with the body. He is an entrepreneur with an MBA. And it seems to me from a very prestigious school, from my understanding, and a writer, a podcast host of a podcast called Healthier Tech, which I'm a fan of. And we're just extremely excited to have you here for a number of reasons. I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro before I get you to invite you to speak here. What our guests will learn is that, and maybe you're going to find out yourself, is that you're actually our first speaker on non-native electromagnetic frequencies, which are man-made, and they come in this category of non-ionizing radiation, which is used so much today for communication, to carry information through the airwaves, to cook our food, things like that. And before we start, I just want to say a couple personal things. One is I'm currently reading this book, Overpowered, that R wrote with his dad. And I'll just show, for the people look on YouTube, I will show you the book. I have not been able to put it down. I can't believe I missed this in my, building workshops on electromagnetic radiation over the years. I've been at this for about 7 years. And I'm so glad I have this, what I call the missing piece, because it is just it's clarifying some things, giving me, validation of things that I intuitively knew, but the science in it, the amount of studies that are referred to, it's just eye-watering. And I will refer to a few things possibly as we go on. So I do consider myself an EMF specialist of sorts, but I am not a building biologist. I would love to do that. I don't know. We'll see if I can get that in the cards and fit that in. But I do test homes primarily for clients that are experiencing unexplained health issues to determine if they need to mitigate or even to get a building biologist. So I'm kind of like that first step, because I think a lot of people are missing it at all. So it's better to have a first step but I let everybody know I'm not a building biologist. I don't know it all. I'm still learning. So having the CEO of Shield Your Body is a quantum healthy highlight for me, because I've known about R for a number of years. And I think we both have an inner EMF activist in us, whether it's formal or not. So we're part of a little special club. And I also learned that just through the background of this, and we're going to get into it towards the end of the podcast, just how many tools that existed that I didn't know existed that are on the Shield Your Body website. So I'm excited to bring that out to the listeners as well. So, but let's talk about if we could talk about the book a little bit first, and then we'll get more into Overpowered. The actual official title is What Science Tells Us About the Dangers of Cell Phones and Other Wi-Fi Age Devices. So it's not strictly about cell phones. It's a lot about cell phones, but it's widely regarded as one of the best books written on the science of the health effects of EMF radiation. Was written in 2014. So it covers so many studies up to that point. I know there's been more.
Yeah, it was actually written in 2012, and then it took a while to go through all the processes of being released. So the science is up to 2012.
2012. Okay, that's good to clarify. And so I really want to start this with an excerpt from the book. It's near the beginning, chapter 1, because I think it's fitting to begin to frame this interview. You may not know it, but you are participating in an unauthorized experiment, the largest experiment ever, in the words of Swedish neuro-oncologist Leif Salford. For the first time, many of us are holding high-powered microwave transmitters in the form of cell phones directly against our heads on a daily basis. Cell phones generate electromagnetic fields, EMF, and emit electromagnetic radiation, which we call EMR. They share this feature with all modern electronics that run on alternating current power, AC power, which is from the power grid and the outlets in your walls, or that utilize wireless communication. Different devices radiate levels of EMF with different characteristics. What health effects do these exposures have? Therein lies the experiment. So I feel like you are one of the few that are acutely aware of this experiment, probably know its outcome if education and mitigation with shielding is not implemented sooner than later. So I could say so much about the book, could probably fill 10 podcasts, but just some quick comments to inspire other people listening to, that have an interest at all in this subject to maybe pick up this book is that it's not hard to read. It's so well done. But one of the things I really liked about it, and that I push aside, is that it doesn't just talk about radio frequency and microwave radiation. It does talk about the power side, like what we call the extremely low frequency, and how that is just as important or maybe we don't know even more. You could argue many different ways. So I just thought that was something special about the book that I liked. And I could go into detail on every chapter, even though I haven't even finished. I'm so close to finishing it. But the non-human impact chapter and how it affects, the birds, the bees, and just the greater understanding you come out of after reading that chapter, really enjoyed, as depressing as it is. But it also helps support another mentor of a lot of ours, Arthur Furstenberg, who wrote The Invisible Rainbow. And he, it supports that book, but it also supports the continuous writing. If anybody follows his newsletter, he's always, mentioning new impacts on different birds and bees and flora and fauna. So I really enjoyed that. I also felt the book really supported Dr. Deborah Davis's book called Disconnect, which I read years ago and loved. So that's another really great book for people.
I believe she just updated that.
Did she?
I believe either that or she did a new book, but it might be an update of Disconnect, or it might be a new book, but she has a new one out.
Okay, I had not heard that. Okay. And then there's another chapter called Other Health Effects of EMF. There's various chapters on the health effects, one specific to cancer, which is fascinating. But there was, on the other health effects, something that you did talk about was melatonin. And that's something in the quantum biology space that we talk tons about. And I just really found it interesting that you had that way back then in 2012, describing the reduction of melatonin from ELF, extremely low frequencies, and cell phone radio frequencies. And it's just, so fundamental to understand that.
Yeah. Another thing I think, the book talks about, and you'll forgive me, I think you're perhaps a little more familiar with the content than I am, because it's been over 10 years. But that, because you're talking about how, even in 2012 we knew, and as the book notes, the first, and this might not actually be the first, but the first that I'm aware of, research that indicated there were biological impacts from these forces was from 1926. That's 98 years ago is when the science actually started being generated on this topic. And then very significant findings were made, for instance, in the 1960s by Dr. Alan Frey.
Yes.
He discovered the microwave auditory effect in members of the military working with radar and creating audio hallucinations and tinnitus in these servicemen. So a lot of the science is actually, I mean, it's actually quite old at this point.
Yeah, Dr.
That
Henry Lai as well.
Yeah, so that's
His
from
work
the 90s.
from the
And I
90s.
apologize, one of my dogs is yapping. So if that becomes if you
Okay.
can hear it, let me know and I'll figure
You're talking
something out.
to two dog lovers here. So yeah, no, we've had one of our guests breastfeed their baby online. So it's all good quantum effects here in the background.
It's all
But yeah,
good.
so you mentioned Dr. Lai. Actually, it's more than one study, but the work done by him and
Singh?
Dr. Narendra Singh
Yes.
are among what I consider to be the most important, and the work that I find myself citing most frequently when people ask me about this topic, and the reason being that their work demonstrated that at the time they were studying cordless phones, because this was the early 90s, not cell phones, but we're talking about essentially the same technology here.
Which are nasty too.
Yeah,
Right.
and they demonstrated that exposure to cordless phone radiation led to damaged DNA, what are called strand breaks, right? The
Right.
double helix is formed up of two strands, and exposure to cordless phone radiation led those strands to break. Sometimes it was one strand, sometimes it was both strands, right? So you have a single strand break or a double strand break.
Right.
If it's a double strand break, the cell will kill itself. And that is, as we mentioned in the book, and it turns out I do remember parts of it.
Yeah, you're doing great.
That is the preferred outcome, right? Because if
Right.
only a single strand breaks, the cell will then recreate the broken strand
That's
from
right.
its partner in the cell. And that is the process by which mutations occur. And that is the process by which disease forms in the body.
That's right.
And so, and their work also showed not just that the cordless phone radiation increased the rate of strand breaks in the body, but that increased rate of strand breaks persisted for hours after the exposure. And the reason I find myself citing this and explaining this research so often is because DNA is in every cell of every living thing. And when you realize that's the impact it's having on DNA, it is not any stretch at all to then understand why every form of life is impacted. And it's not just every form of life, it's essentially every biological system in every form of life. And again, this is because DNA is in every cell of every system of every living thing on the planet.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you highlighted that. For years, I thought it was your dad. I used to cite your dad as the one who was the first to teach the world that, and maybe it's because he taught it. I don't know that about the impact on DNA.
Yeah, so his more prominent work in this arena was on heat shock proteins. And so what he showed is that levels, and it's either most or all of the work was on ELF, that is this low frequency form of EMF that comes from power lines and appliances and so forth. And what he showed over and over again is that exposure to these ELF fields led your cells to react with the cellular stress response, right? They released these heat shock proteins.
Right.
And that was an indication that the body was interpreting this force as a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lot of the work that he did. He did a lot of other work too, and I don't know all of it. One that gets a lot of attention, it was more of a theory. It was published, but it wasn't research. It was more of a theory that DNA, and maybe this is where you got his link to DNA from.
Okay.
DNA is designed effectively as a fractal antenna.
Right.
And fractal antennas are these antennas that are designed like fractals with these self-repeating patterns. They are in our cell phones. And the reason they are in our cell phones is because they are incredibly effective at receiving signals, right? You really amplify the effectiveness of the antenna with a fractal antenna. And if DNA is so sensitive to these forces, it might be because they have a pattern of a fractal antenna, which would make them even more sensitive to picking up and receiving and responding to these human-made signals.
Right. Wow. My goodness. So much there. They're just, yeah, they're, so we now call it the cell danger response. So maybe he didn't have that term back then.
Yeah, I didn't
Y-
even know that, so I
Yeah, we
appreciate
call this,
that.
all these things happen. And we get, we could jump there now, but I just want to, we'll talk more about the EMF health effects. Because I really want to define for people. So some people have never heard what a non-native EMF and what non-ionizing. Could you help us with that? Could you help?
Sure. So I'll try to be as succinct as possible here. EMF is, as you said, electromagnetic fields. And as the name suggests, it is a form of energy that is created. It consists of both electric and magnetic forces. And so that's where it gets its name. Now, there is a whole spectrum of different kinds of EMF. And what characterizes one form of EMF versus another form of EMF is the frequency, right? How quickly it vibrates. Now, I mentioned there's many different types of EMF on this spectrum. One type of EMF that everyone is very familiar with is visible light. The visible light is a natural form of electromagnetic radiation, and it is essentially the only form, and I say essentially because there are a couple of minor exceptions, but essentially the only form of electromagnetic radiation to which all life on Earth was exposed for the approximately 3.6 billion years leading up to whatever it was, 1820, 1860, when we started getting the light bulb. And now, so the visible light is essentially right at the center of this spectrum. So there are forms of EMF with more energy, that is, they have a higher frequency than visible light. And these include things like X-rays and gamma rays, as well as ultraviolet. And they have so much energy that they can knock electrons loose from the cells in your body. That is a process called ionizing, because you are ionizing the cell. You're giving it a positive charge by knocking the electron loose. And that process is incredibly damaging to life. And that is exactly why when you go to the dentist and get an X-ray, they cover you in a big lead jacket and the technician leaves the room, right? Because you want to be exposed to as little of this as possible, because it is incredibly damaging, even in incredibly small doses. This is universally accepted science. No one disputes that these forms of EMF are incredibly harmful. Now, though that's ionizing radiation, that's the forms of EMF that have more energy than visible light. So to the left, I'm speaking visually here, but not really to the left, but if you're looking at a chart of the electromagnetic spectrum, to the left of visible light, you have forms of EMF with less energy than visible light. And these are the ones that we're largely talking about in this conversation and in Overpowered and Dr. Davis and so forth.
Right.
And because they have less energy than visible light, they don't have enough energy to ionize the cells in your body, right? So exposure to, for instance, radiation from your cell phone will not knock electrons loose from the cells in your body. So these are called non-ionizing forms of electromagnetic radiation. And because they are non-ionizing, they were for many, many years considered to be benign, right? That they do not harm the body. Now, there is an exception to that, and that is when they are powerful enough to actually heat the cell or the tissue, right, that is recognized as harmful, right? So, and that's, for instance, how your microwave oven works, right? It's exposing your food to microwave radiation with so much power that it can cook it. And so right, the microwave radiation, radiofrequency radiation, all of these forms of non-ionizing radiation can have power levels high enough to actually heat you, and that is harmful. But other than that, if it's not at the threshold to trigger the so-called thermal effect, it was long thought to be benign and inert and harmless to humans. And some people still think that. And that is actually what my father was taught when he went to graduate school. And it's what he was teaching his students at Columbia Medical School for many years, because that's what he was taught. That's what the conventional wisdom was, that these forms of EMF are harmless to human health. It turns out that that belief and assumption was wrong, as now many decades of a growing body of scientific literature demonstrate.
Like literally 100 years, right? When you said
Yes.
back to 19, and then it's something I was
1926.
going to add too, like there was a lot of Russian research at the Carolina Institute in Sweden, and
Karolinska, I think it's
Karolinska.
Karolinska. Yeah.
Thank you, Karolinska Institute. Yeah, a lot
Yeah,
more.
and I think Dr. Magda Havas maintains
Yes.
a archive of Zori Glazer's. So Zori Glazer had done a lot of this. When I say do the research, I'm talking about actually going and finding the studies.
Yes.
Because you are correct, the Russian military did do a lot of research into actually the Soviet military did a lot of research in this area. And Zori Glazer, I believe, accumulated a fair amount of it and then transferred that over to Dr. Havas, who I believe has that on her website now.
I know Dr. Havas. Yeah, I'm in my province. We have a safe technology group, and I'm part of her global brag project. And I got my meters, and I've tested little towns, and I've tested microwaves. And
globalemf.net. Yes, that's the project she does.
Yes.
Where if you have a safe and sound Pro or Pro 2, you can take when you're out in the world, you can take measurements and then you submit them to Dr. Havas, and then she has a map that actually maps reported EMF levels around the world, it's a very, very interesting project.
And it was inspiring because she told us at the time, it was important to measure the little small towns because she considered those the rainforests, as opposed to the cities that were going to get 5G. Yeah, it was interesting. And I've also done cars. And microwave ovens. I think
cars are depressing because there's nothing you can do about them. The only thing you can do is get as old a car as you possibly can.
I have an old car, so mine tested well. I was lucky.
Me too.
I did have an old car.
Vintage. And, vintage is great with cars.
Yeah, I had it, and I just got a new one. Yeah, I mean, it's so much more comfortable and safe. But there
is a downside. Yeah.
I mean, you can't you can't turn off the wireless charger. You might be able to turn off the Bluetooth, but I haven't found out how yet. And so that's what makes newer cars have higher levels of EMF, is all of this technology that goes into them. If you look at a Tesla, for example, I mean, you're talking about, it's probably, I don't want to say, it's over 50 different sources of wireless radiation in the car to support all the technology that goes into making that thing run.
I've seen people posting the Teslas getting, I hope our podcast doesn't get shut down for saying brand names, but the T word, making them sick and having to, they could not drive the car anymore. I've just been seeing it randomly. Like, I think it's getting more well known.
So that gets into something where there's a chapter in the book on this as well, which is electro-hypersensitivity.
Yeah, I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, those are people who, like, if I walk into a room, I can feel more or less fine. And if someone who has EHS walks into that same room, they can have effectively allergic reactions of varying degrees of severity, from minor symptoms like tinnitus or maybe a rash or brain fog, all the way up to extreme debilitating pain. Yeah. And these people are more sensitive to the same level of radiation. And it is I'm not super up to date with the numbers, but it is my belief that more and more people will be experiencing this. Not only, I mean, we can talk about it from just the perspective of toxic load and overall toxic load in the world, but let's ignore that for a moment. Just the levels of EMF itself are going up in our environment. So as the levels are going up, you're going to hit, more and more people are going to hit that threshold where they have these immediate symptomatic responses to these exposures.
I know quite a few in my safe technology group. There's a number. And, I've learned and watched their journeys. I've had a few clients. So that was interesting. I've seen literally the demonstration of them putting their hand on a mouse and the rash starts on their arm, and
Yeah.
it's beyond placebo. Like there's, it's pretty fascinating. And they don't like that. They don't love that term, the label electrohypersensitive, because they feel like everybody's sensitive. And it's really radiation toxicity just showing up, and everybody is being affected by
Yeah, no,
this.
I've heard
Yeah.
the comparison. Like you
Yeah.
don't say someone has cyanide sensitivity.
Right.
So why would you say they have electrosensitivity? And I do know that term, it's gone through different phases in terms of that's when we wrote Overpowered, that was the term, but a couple of years later people wanted a different term. But my understanding is now we've come back to EHS being
Have
sort
we?
of just a
Okay.
general.
I know radiation
Because you
sickness.
need a term, right? That's
Yeah,
basically so we all know that we're talking about the same thing.
that's that's
Um,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
But
oh,
other people call them Wi-Fi allergies. Like if you see it covered in
right.
the press, they'll call it Wi-Fi allergies.
I haven't heard that. Okay. Okay. So we're really into EMF health effects. A few questions on that. Let's just ask, what of humans, what age, I've heard you talk about this, and I'd love you to highlight it for our listeners. What age has the most damage from this radiation, and could you explain why?
When you are a fetus, you have the most. Then when you are a baby, it's a little less risk. Then when you're a child, it's a little less, and then a teen and so forth. So in other words, the younger you are, the
Right.
more vulnerable you are to damage from these forces. And there are a few reasons. Dr. Davis talks about this quite a bit. But one is that children are smaller, right? So if there's a certain amount of radiation in your environment that penetrates an inch into your body, for example, that inch forms a much smaller part of my body, percentage wise, than of a child, right? So a child is going to have more of their body exposed. Another reason being that the younger you are, the thinner your skull. And your skull it's not perfect shielding, but it provides some degree of natural shielding to protect your brain. And so the thinner your skull, the more radiation is going to get into your brain. And another reason is that children are still growing. And so if you damage a cell in that body, and it doesn't kill the cell, but you've damaged the cell, that will then, because they're growing, that will replicate, right? That damage will replicate in the body. And then fourthly, because they have longer to live, right? So if you incur some amount of damage at the age of 50, you may have 30, 40, maybe 50 years left to experience the ramifications of that. If you get it at the age of 5, then you have 75, 85, 95 years in which to experience the ramifications of that damage.
Yeah, that brings up the point of, is this cumulative? This radiation.
Yeah, I mean the health impact the science seems to indicate that these impacts are cumulative. That is, so it's not just a single exposure that increases your risk, it's how much you are exposed to over. And I think that makes intuitive sense. It's also why these regulations, it's one of the reasons why these regulations around, for instance, cell phone radiation are so ludicrous, because they assume that the health risk of using a single cell phone once for 5 minutes has the same risk as using that same cell phone 3 hours every day for 30 years, right? And we all know that this does not make any sense.
And then layer on all the other, like the
exactly.
Wi-Fi, the nearby cell tower, all the power in the house, and that was something in the
Blue
book.
light.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Blue light. I know
There's
these
so many
studies were all
things.
done without, the thought about blue light. But the other thing is just how much these studies, I'm blanking here. Oh, just that, the whole challenge of, I'm having brain fog here. Speaking of EHS, there must be waves coming in. Something to do with the amount of studies. Oh, just over time, just like one short study isn't the same. And the amount of, I loved how you talked about it in the book, the amount of money that it takes to do a 30-year cohort study of multiple countries. There's only been a few of them, and the big one was Interphone that you highlighted, I would say, in the book, and how disappointing it was in the end because they did different things in countries, and
That's one
the
thing that
science
I
isn't
think,
perfect, right?
yeah, that's one thing that I think Overpowered did very effectively compared to
Very.
other books, which is to talk about the nature of this science and the commercial influence on the science, right? So those are two
Yes.
separate chapters.
Yes.
And what you were just, well, actually, Interphone touches on both of those issues. But getting back to the point you were making, right, in terms of the limitations of epidemiology, right?
Right.
So for your audience, and I apologize if I'm sounding
No,
like I'm talking down.
no, don't. No, go for it.
People don't. If people already know this, then I apologize. But there's essentially two forms of science,
Yes.
right? There's the kind you can do in a lab,
Yeah.
and then there's the kind that you do out in the real world, right? So there's lab science, and then there's epidemiology. That's what that's called when you do it out in the real world. Now, in a lab, you can have very controlled environmental settings, right? You can control every aspect of the test. And so you can do it and see what the result is. You can repeat it, you can see what the result is. Another scientist halfway around the world can read how you did it. They can get it set up exactly like you did and repeat it and see what the result is. And so it's very controlled, it's very precise, it's very powerful. The problem is it's also very limited, right? Because if you're worried about, for instance, brain tumors, you can't study that in the lab, right? Because first off, brain tumors take sometimes decades to form. You can't get a subject to sit in the lab and use a cell phone for 20 years and then see what happens. It's horribly unethical and completely impractical. So you can't use lab science really to study disease. You can use lab science to study biological responses, right? So like earlier, we were talking about lie and sing. That was lab science. When we were talking about some of the work my father did, where he was documenting the heat shock proteins in response to exposures, that is lab science. But when you're talking about do cell phones cause brain tumors, then you have to go out into the real world. And then you have all of these other problems that we're talking about here, right? So one, you have to have a really long study in order to measure rates of cancer, of almost any kind of cancer. You need a really long study. You need to control for in today's world, it's basically impossible to get a control group, right? So when you do epidemiology, you need a control group. That is, if you're studying does using a cell phone cause cancer, then you need a bunch of people who don't use cell phones and who aren't otherwise exposed to EMF radiation to form the control group. Those people basically don't exist anymore. There are some obviously limited exceptions. So for instance, the Amish.
I was going to say the Amish. Yeah.
But they also have a lot of other differences in their lifestyle that you can't, that have to be accounted for in the study.
Too many variables.
And so this is incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult science. There is some good science, obviously. There's some very bad science, but that is the limitation here. So that's why it's so hard. Yep. Or let me put it the other way. That's why it's so easy for the wireless industry to muddy the waters around this sort of weight of evidence approach to evaluating the value of the science here, because they can just create a lot of flawed studies. And so,
to provoke.
Yes, exactly correct.
Right. And I loved, there was a whole chapter on the similarity to smoking and how many years it took and how the industry, just used that to provoke doubt over so many years. And
there's another example I'm using now.
Okay.
And I forget the name of the scientist, but Amadou, I think. Anyway, if people want to go rent the movie Concussion with Will Smith, you'll see this story. And this is about the doctor who discovered traumatic brain injuries, or CTE, in football players, right? And so what he noticed was that all these football players were dying with this horrible condition, right? I think it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy is what CTE stands for. Okay. Now, the reason I like talking about this actually did get resolved after a number of years, right? So the NFL eventually did make changes, both in terms of the gameplay rules and in terms of helmet design. But when this doctor came out and said football is causing brain injuries, the NFL opposed him. And I mean, it's not shocking that they would oppose him. The part to me that's shocking is this doctor was basically saying ramming your head with the force of a jackhammer repeatedly, day after day, for years on end can cause brain damage. And the NFL was able to say, yeah, maybe not. I think the jury's out. And they were able to delay effective action and response for years by using that same sort of playbook. And it's not as dramatic or as famous as cigarettes and tobacco and that infamous Brown and Williamson memo, but to me, it's all the more stark that you could confuse people into thinking, well, yeah, maybe ramming your head with the force of a jackhammer day after day, maybe that doesn't cause brain damage.
Right.
So to me, that's a very powerful example.
A couple things come out of that for me, or three things. First of all, something to mention that was mentioned in the book, but I've known, and I know you know about, is the latency effect with EMFs, that it, yes, it's cumulative, but just a lot of people argue with me and say, well, if they're so dangerous, why isn't somebody who has a cell phone, after 5 years of you continue, why don't they have a brain tumor? It can be 10, can be 20, can be 30 years, and you're probably never going to connect the dots, that many years down the way. The other thing, I've done a little experiment myself with a fellow practitioner who does live blood. And Dr. Magda Havas did a number of studies with this, where you take someone's live blood and look at it. It's nice to get a subject who has healthy blood, and this particular colleague had healthy blood. And then she made a 2-minute cell phone call to her with her head, which, she never does, but she did it for science. And then we looked at her blood right away, and it had this effect called rouleau, where it stacked all her red blood cells. It was just like sludge. And then we took a full spectrum, but with red light unit, a very special unit that I have, and put it on. And then we saw the most beautiful blood. Like actually, no, we did that separately before. We tested her blood first, saw this beautiful flowing, like a river with fish flowing all through it. Like, it was incredible. And then we did that light again at the very end after the cell phone, and it brought it back to her normal. It didn't bring it back to that beautiful blood, the flowing blood that she had. But it was nice to see, okay, they're with quantum biology, let's say, maybe there's ways to help keep us healthy, to mitigate, bring down the effects of this oxidative stress, or whatever that we would call it. But so that was it's funny. We have all this, we're saying, well, we don't have the science. A number of people say we don't have the science. It's not definitive. And yet you can do these really simple experiments that don't cost any money. Just like you say, like the football, it's like, okay, this should be common sense. When you see that on a screen and you're like, okay, I got to me, I got the message from that moment. I stopped putting a cell phone to my head. But another thing just to add before we go on, we definitely want to get to shield your body, because we got to talk about EMF protection. To finish kind of the science piece, following on from Overpowered in 2012, there has been other studies, and two ones that I would highlight for listeners is the NTP study. It was a $25 million study that was supposed to definitively show that that cell phones were safe, and it didn't. And it was very controversial. And then there was an Italian study called the Ramazzini, and both of those showed these heart schwannomas, is my understanding, and I think gliomas, like brain tumors and heart tumors. And it's very rare heart cancer of the heart is extremely rare. So it could have been they had, I don't know if they were putting the cell phone near the heart. So don't recommend you put a cell phone in a suit
It's
pocket.
actually, you mentioned Italy. It's legal precedent now, upheld by 2 courts, that cell phones cause brain tumors.
It is, eh?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Wow. Okay. So let me see if there's anything else on health effects. There's so many questions I could ask, but
Yeah, it's a huge.
I'm definitely going to write a blog out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dee and I are we're going to get together and get some, produce something out of this. Yeah. So okay. Need to mention BioInitiative maybe as a resource for people. And I've heard you mention before, I think it was in a podcast, just discussing sort of this idea of misinformation with EMF health effects and yeah, go for it.
So I'll just start with the BioInitiative report.
Okay, great.
So that was, I think the first one was published in 2008. Or maybe it's 2006.
Okay.
I may not remember.
I can't remember.
And then it was updated again in 2012. So there've been 2 versions. And what this working group did, so it was led by Cindy Sage, and she assembled a team of scientists, including my father, who reviewed thousands of studies on the question of biological impact of these exposures. And what they did is they published their findings, right? So they reviewed studies that showed impact, that is negative impact. They reviewed studies that showed no impact. And so it's a comprehensive survey. It's the only one of its kind ever performed on this question. And they published the report, the BioInitiative report, which is available for download at bioinitiative.org. And I'm sure you'll put the link in the show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
And they also have a more easily digestible page of their conclusions. And what they found, it should not really surprise anyone who's been listening to us talk so far, is that there is very strong science showing significant health impact at levels orders of magnitude lower than what current safety standards permit.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. And then just to also mention, the World Health Organization had a committee, the international, it's ongoing, international something research on cancer, and they did IARC, and they classified it as a possible carcinogen.
Yeah, class 2B. And that's both radiofrequency and ELF.
And ELF, okay.
And there's rumors that there's a reconsideration for a prioritization, that is moving it up to class 2A or to class 1. So from possible to probable or to definite. But there's no transparency into that process. We don't even know who is on the evaluation committee, much less if they're actually doing that or not.
Okay. And then, yeah, we have all these.
About it. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have all these safety codes. I know in Canada, I'm in Canada, India's
Safety Code 6.
Safety Code 6. But around the world, it just seems to be this. It's like a global phenomenon that we're all using these old standards. We're not even.
And they're all almost all are based around the thermal effect, which
the thermal effect. Thank you.
Touched on earlier in our conversation, which is we want to ensure that the amount of radiation you're getting off your phone doesn't heat your tissue. Now, that is a vastly insufficient standard, but I would like to ask you and your listeners, have you never felt your ear get warm when using a cell phone or a cordless phone? Or have you, or have a laptop, using a laptop on your lap? Do you think that these devices are actually not heating you? Because in my experience, back from my days before, I stopped holding phones up to my head, I remember my ear getting very warm. And to me, that shows that not only is the safety standard inadequate, but these devices aren't following that safety standard, as inadequate as it is. And in fact, that is what is often found, right? So there is Marc Arazi, I believe is his name, in France. If you Google PhoneGate. So
yes. Oh, yes, that's right.
The French government tested approximately 300 models of cell phones and found that I believe it was 88% of them emitted more more radiation than the manufacturers said they did. And several models emitted more than was legally allowed and had to be recalled off of the market.
That's right. That was the SAR, right? The specific absorption rate,
Yes.
I believe. Okay, right.
That is how, at least in every country of which I'm aware, that is how cell phone radiation is regulated. It's not technically how much radiation the phone emits, it's how much your body would absorb by using it. But there's many reasons why that's a very, very flawed standard as well. But we don't want to, drown your audience in
That's it. Well, they're all depressed now, so we should probably talk about EMF protection. Yeah, just to finish off that, to say that the dose isn't necessarily the poison. I think that was something the book. Thank you very much to that book for showing me that it's not just, because I always think, oh, I want to get all the high sources down, but we need to think about all the sources. So when we get to Shield Your Body here, we'll talk about that. Okay, let's get there then. EMF protection. So first question would be, what do you consider EMF protection? Is it regulated? Is it the Wild West?
I think you've watched one of my videos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
no, it is not. It is not regulated, except for any broad regulations from the Federal Trade Commission that regulate truth in advertising. But beyond that, no, EMF protection is not regulated. And it is like the Wild West. That is the analogy that I often draw for people. And so when you just Google EMF protection, you will find a lot of different things. And I don't mean just like different types of products. I mean completely different types of products. So there's beads and pendants and harmonizers and stickers and so forth. There is a lot of products for sale that likely, well, we're not talking about specific brands, so I don't have to be as careful, that likely don't do anything at all. They certainly aren't based in any science that can explain or demonstrate. And so, these little stickers that you put on your phone, there is absolutely no scientific mechanism of which I am aware that would explain how that makes the radiation any better for you. It just doesn't make sense. Now, this is something I also want to make clear. Just because something can't be proven or demonstrated with science doesn't mean it doesn't actually work, right? Because quite literally everything that science proves today, at one point, it did not prove, right? Because science evolves. That's the whole nature of the body of knowledge and the scientific method. So just because science can't show that something or prove or demonstrate that something works doesn't mean it doesn't work. But there is so much snake oil out on the market that I strongly advise people to avoid things without any scientific backing that could explain and demonstrate the claims that these products are making. So
I would just say, I would add to that, start with mitigation. Like I can tell you every week I get a text, a message, an email from somebody, a friend, a follower, saying, what do you think of this harmonizing device? And I just you can put it on your phone, you can try it and spend your money. And it very may well do something.
So
mitigate.
Reducing sources is by far the most effective way to approach this. EMF protection products are, I refer to them as the second line of defense.
Okay.
So in terms of mitigating your exposures, right? Because the best way to not be exposed to something is to not be exposed to it, right? Right. The best way to avoid UV ray exposure isn't to put on sunblock and go to the beach. It's to stay inside. Now, there are times where you'll still want to go to the beach, and that's where sunblock comes in. And so that's the same sort of model we have here.
Yeah. That's nice.
And so with EMF protection, EMF mitigation, it's really two things. You want to minimize your use of the technologies that emit these forces, and you want to maximize the distance between the source and your body when you are using them. So in terms of minimizing, Now, when you talk, when people hear that they need to minimize their use, a lot of them, their immediate reaction was, I can't give up my cell phone. Well, okay, if you can't give up your cell phone, then, consider, do you really need that Nest thermostat? Do you really need that Alexa, a smart Bluetooth speaker in your living room? These sources of EMF are continuing to explode. So things that weren't a source of EMF 5, 10, 15 years ago, now they are, right? My exercise elliptical has Bluetooth in it that I can't turn off. So the only option is to unplug it. So when I say minimize your use, if you can't give up your cell phone, then there are other ways for you to minimize your use of these products that emit these toxic forces.
Would you call that EMF hygiene? Like going through your house and doing an audit of, okay,
Yeah, sure.
can I get it
and,
down?
And
okay.
a meter is, so there's certain things that are obvious, right? Like, your cell phone is going to be a huge source. Your Wi-Fi router is going to be a huge source. But there are other ones that aren't as obvious. And like the wiring in your wall in one particular part of your room could just be incredibly high just because of how your house is wired, and you wouldn't know that. I once stayed at an Airbnb and I was taking measurements, and there were these crazy high electric fields, and I couldn't figure out why. I tracked it down to a DVD player in the entertainment center, and I unplugged the DVD player, and the electric fields in the house went away. And, I would not have known that had I not been waving my meter around.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of testing.
Yeah.
Yeah, test, don't guess. Yeah.
And I have a free guide with meter recommendations and usage guidelines as well.
Okay.
That's at Shield Your Body. I can give you the link after this so you can put it in the show notes.
Okay, that'd be fabulous. Fabulous.
That's perfect, because I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
And that covers the whole gamut.
Yeah, because there are different kinds of meters. Obviously, there's different levels of quality of meter, but even beyond that, there's different kinds, right? Because there's different forces that you'll want to be measuring. So that's minimizing your use. And even if you do keep Wi-Fi in your house, turn it off when you go to bed at night. That's another way of minimizing your use. Put your phone into airplane mode. You may need your phone for several hours a day, but you probably don't need it 24 hours a day, right? So put it into airplane mode when you're not using it. Things like that. There's lots of ways of minimizing your use. Now, the second tip, that was the one that may be a little less intuitive for people. And I don't have my phone here, but let's pretend this remote control for my air conditioning, let's pretend it is a cell phone.
Right.
And if this phone is an inch away from my body, and then I double that, so now it's 2 inches away from my body, I've reduced the power of my exposure by 75%.
Wow.
And that is because the power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. And so the further you can keep these things away from you when you're using them, the better. And that's why my laptop, I don't know if you can gauge from this image, it's pretty far away from me, right? Because I have an external keyboard wired and an external trackball. And so my laptop is actually, 2-3 feet away from me. There's a lot of ways in which you can get the technology further away from you, and it makes a massive difference in your level of exposure. So another example is if you are on Wi-Fi, put the router in a part of the house where it's just furthest away from where people spend their time. Another example, this is actually why for most people, one of the best things that they can do to cut their EMF exposure is to stop carrying their phones in their pockets. And because this is very common, incredibly common. And you'll see people at the gym with it in their pocket, or women tucking it into their sports bra during workouts and so forth. When it's right up against your body, you are getting the maximum possible dose of radiation that these highly overpowered products have to give you. And so if you can keep it even an inch away, you've made a huge difference. If you can keep it 4 inches away, you've made an even bigger difference. But when it's right up against your body, you are getting a lot of exposure. And they put them in their pockets often for hours at a time every day. So you're talking about significant cumulative exposure from this one behavior. And so if you can get the phone out of your pocket, or if you can put it into airplane mode when it is in your pocket, you will be doing yourself a tremendous favor. That is, for many people, that is probably the single most effective thing that they can do to reduce their exposure.
And I would add, well said, that it's the precautionary principle. Let's assume that it's a possibility that a lot of this, independent science, let's say, all these studies, that there's some truth to that maybe we should just play it safe. And because the impact we're seeing is things like brain tumors and nasty ones like glioblastomas that don't give people a lot of time to live,
Well, to me, I mean, I
you know?
understand that the information space out there is I have a different opinion than maybe the average person does. But to me, this is not a question. That EMF, human-made forms of EMF radiation, cause biological impact at levels that are incredibly low and much lower than what safety regulations permit. That is not a question.
It's not debatable.
To me, it's not. But the question that's valid is what actually is the impact? Because we don't know all of that. As we were talking about earlier, this type of research is incredibly difficult to conduct, both in terms of time, study design, cost, finding a good control group, and keeping in mind, if we started a study today on, a 30-year study today on cell phones and brain tumors, in 30 years, when we're able to publish the results, the exposure levels are already going to be many orders of magnitude higher than they are today. And so you're in this space, this environment that is constantly shifting, increasing the toxic load while you're trying to prove really what happened 20 years ago, not what's happening today.
And it might not necessarily be cancer. It could be something else. It could be slow.
No, that's exactly
heart
right.
disease or autoimmune or so many.
Yeah, this is what my father was a big point. I think that the actual, I may not get it exactly right, but this wording is, I'm pretty sure, in the book, which is just because something doesn't give you cancer doesn't mean it's not harming you, right? I mean, cancer gets a lot of attention, especially brain tumors, because it is absolutely effing terrifying. Right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense that people would pay attention to that. But it is every biological system, right? So going back to this example of phones in pockets, and yes, the science, some science says it's harmful, some says it's not. I'll tell you, there's one area where the science is incredibly strong, and that is what your cell phone is doing to your sperm. It is killing your sperm. This is science that has been done over and over and over again. There's really strong work out of Kaiser Permanente by Dr. Di-Kun Lee, but it's by many other scientists all around the world.
Australia.
Yeah. And not only do they show that carrying your phone in your pocket destroys your sperm, they also are able to show that stopping carrying your phone in your pocket restores your sperm, right? Because sperm, unlike a lot of other parts of the body, sperm is regenerated every 24 hours. And so that's not to say there isn't some lasting impact from that exposure, but you can see the impact on sperm within minutes of the phone being in the pocket, and you can see the impact of removing the phone from the equation within a day.
And then the converse is women. I work primarily with women, and I'm always telling them, because we just don't know, like you have your eggs for life.
Yes.
So putting that cell phone in that area is really not smart. It's not wise,
Yeah, eggs are more protected than sperm. God designed us to, dangle our bits all out there,
That's true too. That is true.
So, but I'm not negating what you're saying. I'm saying that there's a complexity around this issue, because the sperm is just more vulnerable, and eggs they're wrapped inside a lot more natural shielding. But to your point, you are born with the eggs that you have. So the damage is irreversible, unlike it is for sperm. I'll say also one other thing, right? Which is, we already talked at length about the impact of EMF on DNA. these reproductive cells, sperm and eggs, they all only have one set of DNA. They only have one strand. They don't have two. They don't have a backup system. So if you're damaging that DNA, that cell is dead and useless. And so it just shouldn't be surprising to people that that these reproductive cells are so vulnerable, because they have no redundancy in the genetic material.
And then you add the other genome, which is the mitochondria, and we now can pretty much definitively say that man-made EMFs are mitochondrial toxins causing this mitochondrial dysfunction. And that's what sort of some of the newer research is showing us. And then that affects the DNA, the nuclear DNA and the RNA. Yeah. Okay, so
getting back to the mitigate, that's the two key rules of EMF protection is
right.
minimize your use and maximize your distance.
Yeah, love it. I love
that.
You
do those two things. And as you were talking about earlier, right, damage from EMF exposure is cumulative. This is a cumulative effect it's having on your body. What that means in turn is any reduction you make in your exposures is helpful to you in reducing your risk, right? So, and it's very important for people to realize you're not going to hit zero EMF, right? That is not a realistic goal for anyone who is looking to participate in modern society. And increasingly, it's not a realistic goal anywhere on the planet, but especially if you're looking to participate in modern society, and especially if you like living in a more urban area, right? The more urban, the more population density, the higher levels of EMF that you're going to have. Whereas it looks like I live in a relatively rural place, and so ambient EMF emissions, like I don't even have cell service at my house. I do out in the road, but fortunately not at my.
Oh no, I do here. Yeah.
And so ambient levels here are incredibly low. And so if I actually just de-energize my house, there's essentially no human-made EMF at all.
Well done.
In my home, but that's not easy for to find. I mean, you have to be willing to live in an environment like this, which I think is like a paradise, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. So anyway, that the point being, zero EMF is not the goal in EMF mitigation and EMF defense. It's knocking out the exposures that you can knock out. Similarly, it might be that your biggest exposure is a cell tower across the street. It could be that, and you can't afford to move. So even though it's your biggest exposure, there might not be anything you could do about it. So don't let that stress you for now. I mean, hopefully you'll have the opportunity to save up and move to somewhere that's healthier. But while there is nothing you can do about it, focus on the exposures you can actually reduce and mitigate. So that is really the approach.
And of course, stress is horrible on the body. Yeah. So you've got to let that stress go and just focus on the things, the wins and the things that you can get down. So that takes us to your company, Shield Your Body, which my understanding is the mission. I've heard two things. I've heard to make technology safer, to help people build a healthier relationship with modern technology.
Oh, so that's my podcast.
That's
Healthier Tech. Yeah.
Okay. Healthier
Tech podcast is to help people create a healthier relationship with modern technology.
Right.
But I mean, I think you can tell they're quite well aligned. It's just
they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Shield Your Body is about helping make technology safer for people to use and enjoy. And I started it, well, I think you said in the intro, I came up with the idea for it while writing the book.
Right.
And I released my first product in 2013, and that was the Pocket Patch, which I only recently discontinued. Okay. And since then, in the subsequent years, I did a baby blanket, a phone pouch, a laptop pad, and so forth. Went full time in 2016, continued growing the catalog. And about a year ago, actually, I realized, there's a lot of types of EMF protection, and people need help figuring out which ones are real. Mm-hmm. And I have an audience. So instead of just selling SYB products, the products that I design and make, we now sell products from, I don't have an accurate count, I think it's 17 brands on the store. So we are now the largest store for consumer EMF protection in the
Wow.
world. I was just checking before we started recording. We have 160 products, and there's actually more that we're in the process of launching. And so we still have the
Exciting.
products that I design and make, like the foam pouch and the sling bag and the baby blanket and the bed canopy, which I would like to come back to. But we also now have EMF testing meters. We have dirty electricity filters. We have blue light protection. We have a low EMF Wi-Fi router, which is increasingly popular.
Oh, I didn't
It
see that.
emits 90% less electromagnetic radiation when it's in use and no EMF when there's not an active connection. So and of course, now a much wider catalog of apparel as well. So we have scarves and hats designed actually for female fashion, unlike before and unlike you find in many EMF shielding stores. So most of the products are based on EMF shielding, right? So I was talking before about how there's a lot of forms of EMF protection that don't really have science to explain or demonstrate their efficacy. EMF shielding is a specific type of protection that was invented by a British scientist named Michael Faraday, whose name some people might recognize from the Faraday cage, right? So what he showed 190 years ago, I think, is that if you essentially weave conductive metals into certain patterns, you can block and deflect electromagnetic radiation. And so he did this to build Faraday cages, which are full enclosures, which have been used not only in science and science museums for kids to really enjoy, but also in electronics manufacturing, right? Because you want to shield, there's certain electronic components that are very sensitive to damage and interference from electromagnetic fields. So you wrap these in this type of shielding. And in the past, I'd say, I don't know, 20 years or so, companies have been using this same technology to create products to reduce human exposure to electromagnetic radiation. And so for instance, actually I have some, I don't need to show everything, but just to give an idea. So here is my Pouch Deluxe.
Okay.
The way my products are designed, the back of the pouch is lined with 2 layers of this shielding material that I was just describing to you. The front is not lined with any protective. So you put your phone in the pouch, and then with this product, you can wear it as a crossbody or on your belt or off with the carabiner, but you hang it on your body in some way in which the back is towards the body. So your phone can still send and receive data, but a bunch of the radiation is being deflected away from your body. Now, there are some products, and I carry these in my store. They're not SYB. They're from a company called Silent, who makes fantastic and gorgeous products that are called Faraday pouches. And so unlike my product here, only the back is lined. In a full Faraday pouch, the entire pouch is lined, right? So it's like a pouch version of a Faraday cage. And these completely silence your phone. Now, the reason I don't advise, so the reason I don't do that is because I designed my products to make it safer for you if you need your phone to be on. If you don't need your phone to be on,
Just turn it off. Exactly.
Right. And so, but where silent products really come into play is increasingly is in terms of privacy. Because you can still now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but with newer iPhones, you can track them even when they're fully powered down. Like they're off and you can still track them. And to me, that is shocking. And so that's where these Faraday pouches and bags really come into play, is in terms of privacy and security. But when it comes to EMF protection, if you don't need your phone to be on, then you should turn it off, and then you don't need a product like this. But if you do, like you're working, right? You're working and you need your phone to be on, you're out and about, but you want to cut your EMF exposure, that's where a product like the Pouch Deluxe comes in.
Here's a question. A client actually gave me a Faraday bag a few years ago. When I tried to carry it and listen to a downloaded podcast, doesn't work. So that's why I'm thinking it should. I don't, but it didn't with the Faraday, but that's where I'm thinking your pouch, like I have a pouch. Unfortunately, my phone is so big that it's still, I don't think it's still too
No,
big
it
for
would
the
fit in
actual.
this. We designed this because we have a
Yeah,
smaller pouch.
that's on my wish list.
This is the traditional, it's not the right
That's the one
color.
I got.
Yeah. So this, and this, certain phones, especially with cases being what they are these
That's the thing.
days,
It's the case.
yeah, it won't
Yeah.
fit in this. So when we designed the Pouch Deluxe, we left no room for anyone to say my phone doesn't fit. So this not only this fits any phone, it fits my Kindle. It'll fit a whole bunch of I like at
Blue
once,
blockers,
right? Yeah. And it's really
essentials.
nicely designed. I mean, so we went from, because it was a small company, we're still a small company, but when I was a one person company, we were just designing things that would work. And now we've gotten to a point where we're designing things so they actually look nice. And so, and are very functional, right? So that's, I was saying, the Pouch Deluxe has the crossbody strap, it has the belt hoop, and it has the carabiner. So 3 ways to carry it. It has a front compartment, it has a divider in the middle, and then it has, by special request of Kathy Cook, who you may
Yes.
know, it has a pen holder on the side, so we got that integrated into the design. But actually, my favorite product of mine right now, and I didn't close the zipper, so things are falling out. What a mess.
You're doing show and tell. This is great.
Is
Everybody, you
my-
gotta listening. You gotta watch the YouTube.
Is my new, we call it the Metro Vegan Leather Fanny Pack. So
See, I'm
it's a
going
fanny-
between those two, so I love that you're.
This is my favorite.
Is it?
Yeah, because you can't feel it. It's vegan leather, meaning it's not leather, right?
Okay.
But it doesn't. It has such a nice. It's such a nice feel. It's a really just nice look. This one is slim. We have another fanny pack that's significantly bigger, and if you want to carry more stuff. But I just love this, and I use it as a cross because I don't like fanny packs. My father loved them,
Okay.
but I wear it, just as a crossbody.
Okay, got it.
And so this is my new favorite. My prior favorite was the sling bag. That is the biggest of these. So as you can tell, I focused a lot. We actually have 8 products now in this category of these bags and pouches.
It's needed.
Because I want to give people option. To me, it's the most important use case that people should be protecting against, which is, again, this carrying your phone. And so I wanted to give people options that fit their lifestyle so they'll actually use it. We even now have a purse. I don't know if you happen to see the purse.
No.
It's a really nicely designed purse. It's this sort of, I should know the name of the color, but it's just a really nice kind of sky blue vegan leather with brown handles. It's really attractive.
Okay. Going on the website.
So I have eight of these products now, and there's more in development, and they're all in what we call the SYB Signature Safer Phone Collection, because that's really where I feel is most important for people to most practical as well to reduce their exposures.
I have a question, just maybe to end on, to cover a bunch of products on before we go to start to wrap up. You know what's happened to me, because there was a possible delay on this recording, and some of the listeners know, but I have broken my tibia plateau, and it's not a good injury. It's in 10 little, only the right side, but it's 10 pieces.
Oh,
so
that's called shattering, isn't it? Not breaking.
Yeah, they didn't say shattering, but anyway, so I'm having surgery in a couple days, and I'll have a bionic knee apparently after, and so I'm shifting a lot because I'm super uncomfortable here, but my legs out straight. So here's my predicament, is that I used to have my office, which is far from the Wi-Fi. I have a wired computer. I thought I had it cased, but now I'm using a laptop, and so it's over my leg. And my priority now is to heal this leg. And of course, a little bit in your book, but also in the Body Electric, we talked about, really highlights the impact of EMFs on bone health and bone healing. And there are some strategies you can use to accelerate, to help the healing, but you can interfere, I think, with that healing with.
Yeah, and we have a pretty recent article on our site about research into bone density. So
okay, I will look that up.
With all of the right, because there are therapeutic uses of human human-made forms of EMF.
Right.
You just talked about in terms of bone regeneration. There's also TENS devices for muscle therapy. There's multiple, and I'm not on top of all of these, but there's multiple therapies that rely on devices that expose you to human-made forms of EMF. What's important to realize is those are very precisely calibrated doses of very specific frequencies.
True.
And when you're talking about the stuff that's coming from your phone or from your Wi-Fi or from your laptop, these are not precisely calibrated doses of frequencies that have been shown to be therapeutic, right? And so even though, right, a very specific dose of a certain type of EMF can help bone regeneration, that doesn't mean EMF exposure in general promotes bone regeneration. And there is research demonstrating negative impact on bone density.
And that's what I've heard with people wearing it on their hips. I've heard the statement of people that have, it might have been Dave Asprey, to be honest, but he's the Bulletproof Coffee guy, and he measured his, I don't know if it was him or he talked about somebody else, but they actually measured the hip bone density, and it was 10% lower on the hip where the cell phone was worn.
That's not surprising.
So yeah. So here's the question for you is I'm looking to prioritize my purchases. And so I'm looking to see how I can.
Well, if you're using your laptop in proximity to your lap, and I'm assuming it'll be shifting positions just like you are, I would recommend the baby blanket.
And that's what came up during this interview is when you mentioned the baby blanket. I thought I didn't even have that on my list. I thought I should get a laptop pad.
No, the baby blanket, the laptop pad is good, but it's really designed for portability, and so it's the same, more or less the same size as your, it's a little bigger than your laptop. Obviously you want that,
which would be good if you were let's say you're traveling on a trip. I'm thinking in a backpack, and if you your work, you don't want to shut down your whole computer, I mean, you could put it in airplane mode, which would help, but you'll still have the low frequencies as well, right?
Yeah. So the baby blanket will just cover a whole lot more, and you can use it to cover your belly as well, right? The laptop pad only goes underneath the laptop, whereas the baby blanket, you can, it's 40 inches by 32 inches. It's quite big. You can adjust it. No matter where you move the laptop, it's still being shielded. And so, and we do have many customers who buy, I mean, it's called the baby blanket. It's designed to look like a baby blanket, but a lot of customers who buy it who are using it for laptops.
Babies. Okay. The other question, this is an exciting product that you have never heard of, called the NCB. And here's my challenge. I'm thinking I want to be grounded. So I'm actually holding onto a grounding little cord here while I'm outside. So
and where does that plug in? Where does that ground?
Right into the ground.
Oh, then you're fine.
Yeah. So but that's just when I'm outside on the deck here. I'm working a lot outside, actually trying to get some natural man-made from the ground and from the sun. So, but when I'm indoors or when I'm sleeping, I do have a grounding mat. Another client made for me, and I'd love to sleep on that and really actuate my healing at night. But I have tried once plugging. I only tried once, and I couldn't get to sleep. I was wired with literally my brain was wired or whatever. But I had to finally unplug it, and then I finally fell asleep. So I have mitigated dirty electricity to a degree. It's down around 50 or 60.
Yeah, but when you do that, you're not doing it on the grounding conductor, right? So there's obviously, outlets have 3 prongs. The hot, the neutral, and the ground.
Right.
And dirty electricity filters clean the hot and the neutral.
Okay.
And they leave the ground untouched. And so that's where the NCB comes in. So you can think, it actually does more than this, but you can think of it as a dirty electricity filter for the ground.
Right. Okay.
And so the regular NCB plug, you plug that into a wall, that will clean one grounding product, right? So if you have a grounding mat, you can plug it into the NCB and plug that into the wall. If you want to clean an entire grounding conductor circuit, you can use the NCB Pro. And so that anything plugged into any outlet on that circuit will have been cleaned by the NCB Pro.
Okay.
It's a little bit more. It's probably the most complicated product. It's not probably. It's definitely the most complicated product that I carry. I'm privileged to work directly with the inventor Andrew McAfee to bring that to market. And I've learned a lot about it. I've given webinars with Andrew, but it's still super complicated.
Okay.
Which is why if you buy the Pro, you actually get a free half hour of consulting with an NCB expert.
Okay. Oh, wow. Good to know. I think that was my questions because it was.
We're,
Oh,
we're
and just, yeah,
What?
that's
yeah,
just,
we're
I think,
Oh, right. Yeah. So we're talking about this store. It's at it's at shieldyourbody.com. That's all one word, shieldyourbody.com. And that's where you'll find the store. You'll also find hundreds of articles about EMF. You'll find links to our YouTube channel where we have hundreds of videos, explainers, webinar archives. We have a lot of ebooks. Oh, we have, you mentioned the BioInitiative report. We have an app that we built. And when I call it an app, a lot of people think that means you download it to your phone. It's on the website. It's an
Okay.
application you can use on the website, which has over 1,000 of the studies covered by the BioInitiative report.
wow.
And so if you take a measurement with your EMF meter, you can put that measurement into the app and it will tell you the studies in its own database that demonstrate health effects at or below the level that you measured. Does that make sense? So you can see what science says about the specific exposure that you've measured with your meter.
Wow. My
So
God.
these are examples of the things that we have at shieldYourBody.com.
Thank
Are
you
do
for
you-
clarifying that it wasn't an app because I heard you talk about this on another podcast and I went looking in the app store for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a web app, but yeah, you're right. I need to come up with another word.
I'm
It's-
concerned
so-
that you don't sleep. How do you
Yeah.
get all this done?
Well, I
Oh,
didn't code that app. I just
Oh.
designed it. I didn't code
Okay.
it. So I have a team now, fortunately. So, but I appreciate that. And the other thing we mentioned on this show is the Healthier Tech podcast.
Yes.
So you can find if you're searching any like Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find the Healthier Tech podcast. And our website is healthiertech.co. And we're just about to start season 4. The first I don't know when this is coming out, but our first episode of season 4 is coming out on September 10th. And that will be with the inventor of the low EMF Wi-Fi router that I was talking about.
Awesome. Now, you've been very generous with your time. So I want to make sure we close here. A second, when you were talking about your products, you said you wanted to revisit
Oh, the canopy.
Do you
Yeah,
want
so-
to take a second to talk about
Sure.
that or?
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
All right.
So most of my products are electronics accessories with a real focus on the bags and pouches. They solve a very specific sort of use case. We also have anti-radiation headsets. We have some apparel, like the baby blanket. I consider that to be apparel, but we have a baseball cap. You know, they're kind of they're either designed to protect a specific exposure or a particular part of your body. So
I'm
then
thinking
there's
about the
these people-
bandana.
Yeah,
Because
I
I
like
think-
the bandana.
Oh, I think we all need to be concerned about our thyroids.
I like the
facing-
neck gaiter for that, but
Do
they
you?
both work. Yeah,
Because
And
I
can
was
also
worried
tie-
I was worried it would shift down. It looks like it
Uh,
might sink down too low below the thyroid. Can you keep it there? That's my
Yeah.
question.
I mean, I believe that you can. I mean, it's made of a nice elastic material,
Okay.
so it should stay in place.
It's a little more stylish. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm getting
I like the look of that one.
Okay.
But then you have these situations, like I gave an example earlier, right? There's a cell tower outside of your window, and what are you going to do about it? Or you live in an apartment building and you see 25 Wi-Fi networks from all of your neighbors. You have these exposures that you can't do anything about, right? You can't go turn off 25 Wi-Fi routers. You can't go turn off the cell tower across the street. So that's when people start thinking, like, maybe I should use EMF paint and paint my room. But that is, for reasons I don't want to get into here, that is incredibly complicated and expensive. And then you have to make a lot of other changes to your lifestyle, right?
It
to
can be
make sure-
dangerous.
It can be dangerous. And it's very difficult
can
to
backfire.
remove.
Yeah.
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 So that's when I decided we needed a bed canopy, right? So it won't shield your entire bedroom, and it won't shield your entire home, obviously, either. But you can create a very protected, enclosed sanctuary for your bed, which is where you spend, approximately 8 hours a day. And you can, so even if you are in a high EMF apartment or home and there's nothing you can do about those sources, you can at least create a bed sanctuary for yourself. And so our The SYB canopy also includes floor mats so that you can get the full enclosure that you would want in order to get that level of protection. And so it's a great alternative for people. It's not cheap. I mean, it's made with a lot of silver and it's a big product. So depending on the size that you get, it's anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000. But it's really powerful, really effective. It creates a great low EMF environment for you to sleep when you don't have options about what you can do to, like you're not in control of these sources. Mm-hmm. And so for a lot of people, it is it's almost, I mean, I don't like speaking in these terms, but for a lot of people, it's almost a lifesaver because it takes an environment that they were just struggling with and it gives them peace to sleep. So that is the one. That was a big move for me to decide to do a product that big and expensive. You might think, well, why wouldn't you want to sell an expensive product? You make more money. But when you have, returns issues, you have warranty issues, it's a big risk to take when most of your sales are for products under $50. It's a big business risk to take on doing a product like that. But I felt it was a really important set of use cases that we needed to have some kind of solution for.
Well, you've clearly been really thoughtful in every scenario that people encounter, because you're right. Like, what do you do when there's a tower outside your house and you can't move your family? Just going on your website and looking at things, hearing you speak, and I have not read the book like Laura's halfway through already, and I plan on doing that. But I know it well, unless I could be wrong, you're a for-profit company, but mm-hmm. your actions indicate more of a nonprofit company, and all of the free mm-hmm. advice that you give and the things that you're doing for all of us is just simply incredible. And this has just been absolutely lovely chatting with you today. And I want you to know,
really kind.
I want you to know, I just got done doing a 3-day drive from Oregon to Minnesota and was listening to you. And my husband, sorry, I get emotional. My husband was listening to the podcast, and afterwards, the first one, because we listened to 3 of you in a row, he was like, well, I'm not putting my cell phone to my ear anymore. And when you're a wife and you're telling your husband, don't do this and don't do that, and you're kind of really immersed in this all of this quantum biology stuff and mitigating and all these things, and for him to hear it from somebody else was just a huge game changer. And so thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm glad I was able to make a difference. And it's just funny to think of somebody binging R blank podcasts on a road trip, the way that I American Scandal or something like that.
Well, I want to ask you the signature question, which is, what does quantum healthy mean to you?
Okay, so that's interesting, right? Because you folks know that when you reached out to me, I actually asked you specifically, what does this mean? And it's not an easy answer, but you gave me a lot of information. I appreciate that. So
we gave you homework.
Yeah, you gave me homework, and I read through a lot of it. But I think, kind of stepping back a bit, what it means to me is the search for these connections and interactions of the world that impact our body that maybe aren't immediately apparent, that aren't immediately apparent, right? There's mechanisms in play here that have direct impact on our health, our quality of life, that are just effectively completely invisible. And it's the process of illuminating those invisible connections.
That was a glorious answer.
That was... It was perfect.
Because quantum is all about doing the minimal, the smallest thing to get the biggest result, mm-hmm. And that's exactly what, your aim is. And
thank you so much, R.
Feel free to reuse that if it helps.
Well, we'll quote it. And
we'll be quoting you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I think Andia said so many things in terms of thanking you, but I'll just add to it. I think for many people with electrohypersensitivity, or if you want to call it radiation sickness, you've in this journey of working tirelessly. We think you don't sleep, but all just making technology safer and all the free education that you've done. But for certain products that you've come up with, I think you've rescued many of those people with EHS. And so to be a voice for them, thank you so much for all you've done, all you're going to do, and for the generous time that you've just given us on this podcast. And we will try and get as many people to listen to this. Yeah, just our brains are full. I think it's a gift how you can explain this so simply. Your explanation of ionizing radiation, with knocking off the electron, it's like, oh yeah, that is it. That is how, the difference. And just this has been a journey. This last, I think it's an hour and a half we're probably coming up to. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you both for the invitation. It's been a pleasure to meet both of you and to have this conversation. And I look forward to future discussions.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Ndia at ndiaray.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.